The records are real. What almost nobody kept straight is which parts of this story the police actually wrote down and which parts a newspaper made up. Police Constable John Neal walks his beat down Bucks Row a little before 4 in the morning. It is the poorest quarter of the richest city on earth. Gas lamps every 100 feet and fog that swallows the light between them. He has passed this spot half an hour ago and seen nothing. This time, his lantern finds a woman lying against a stable gate. Her name is Ann Nichols. She is 43 years old, and she is the first. Over the next 10 weeks, 5 women will be murdered inside a few hundred yards of where Constable Neal is standing. The most powerful police force in the world will take statements from thousands of people, chase every letter, search every lodging house, and catch no one. Not then, not ever. The legend says that is because the killer was a genius who outwitted them all. The records say something worse. The killer barely had to try. This is the story of why Jack the Ripper was never caught, and of the night a police commissioner personally destroyed the only clue. To understand why no one was caught, you have to understand where this happened. Whitechapel, 1888, is a square mile holding almost 80,000 people. Families sleep 4 to a room. Those who can't afford a room pay 4 pence to lean on a rope stretched across a common lodging house and sleep standing up. When even that is out of reach, you sleep in a doorway, or you walk the streets until dawn because it is warmer than lying still. Remember that detail. It matters more than any suspect. Because here is the first thing the legend gets wrong. The 5 women history calls the Ripper's victims are almost always described as prostitutes, stalked on the job. But the modern reassessment of their lives finds something plainer and sadder. Several of them were simply homeless, killed not while working but while asleep, in the open, because they had nowhere else to be. That reading is contested by some historians. What isn't contested is who they were. Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Not a set of crime scenes. 5 women, most of them middle-aged, most of them destitute, all of them with names the papers barely printed while printing the killers forever. Dies scientist. 8 days later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman is found in a backyard on Hanbury Street. The same wounds, the same method, fast, silent, in the dark, and gone before anyone hears a thing. Now the pattern is undeniable, and the East End begins to panic. Vigilance committees form. Men patrol with whistles. And the newspapers, this is 1888, the first great age of cheap mass circulation press, realize they have the story of the decade. They just don't have a name for him yet. Soon they will invent one. In the early hours of September 30th, he kills twice in one night. First, in Dutfield's yard, Elizabeth Stride, though here the killer is interrupted, likely by a cart turning in, and her wounds stop short of the rest of the pattern. Whatever he came to finish, he doesn't. So, less than an hour later and half a mile away, he does it again. Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. And this second murder crosses a line on a map that will help doom the entire investigation. Because Whitechapel is policed by the Metropolitan Police. But Mitre Square, where Eddowes died, sits inside the City of London, a separate square mile with its own separate police force. One killer, one night, two victims, two rival departments, two sets of files that do not talk to each other. In an era before any national criminal record, before a single shared photograph or fingerprint, the killer's luckiest move was simply to step across an invisible line. And then comes the moment that defines this whole case. Fleeing Mitre Square, the killer drops a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron in a doorway on Goulston Street. Above it, chalked on the brick wall, is a line of writing blaming a group for the murders. No one knows if the killer wrote it. It is the only possible physical message in the entire case, sitting directly above a piece of the victim. A city police inspector orders it photographed immediately. It never is. Before a camera arrives, the head of the entire Metropolitan Police, Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, comes to Goulston Street in person and orders the writing washed off the wall. His stated fear that the words, left up as dawn broke over a neighborhood already blamed by rumor, would spark a riot. Understand what happened. The single most senior policeman in Britain personally destroyed the only piece of physical evidence the killer may ever have left, before it could be recorded. Now, the second thing the legend gets wrong, the name. Jack the Ripper was not a signature the killer left in blood, it arrived in the mail. At a news agency. In late September, the Central News Agency receives a letter written in red ink, taunting the police and promising more killing to come, and it is signed with a name no one had ever used before, Jack the Ripper. A follow-up postcard arrives days later in the same hand. The press prints the name, and overnight a series of squalid murders in a slum becomes the work of a single grinning character with a nickname. The panic doubles, circulation soars. Here is what the record says about that letter. The police, at the time, believed it was a fake, most likely written by a journalist to keep the story alive. In 1931, a reporter named Fred Best reportedly admitted that he and a colleague at the Star had written the Dear Boss letter themselves to boost sales. And a century later, a forensic linguist analyzing the surviving letters found the Dear Boss note and the Source Jackie postcard shared the fingerprints of someone who wrote for a living. The most famous serial killer name in history was, in all likelihood, a marketing invention. The brand came before the evidence. Not every letter was a hoax, though. In October, George Lusk opens a small parcel. Inside is half of a human kidney and a letter in a different hand that does not use the famous name at all. Its dateline reads simply, "From Hell." Whether it came from Catherine Eddowes has never been proven and never disproven. So picture the investigation now and picture what it did not have. It did not have fingerprinting. Scotland Yard would not adopt it for another 13 years. It did not have blood typing, which did not exist. No DNA, obviously. No forensics of any kind we would recognize. What it had was boots on cobblestones and doors to knock on. So they knocked. Police interviewed thousands. Butchers, slaughtermen, sailors, doctors, the insane, the merely foreign. They followed up on more than 1,000 letters from the public, nearly all of them useless, many of them cruel jokes. They arrested and released men on no more than a look. And into that vacuum of hard evidence poured the one thing 1888 produced in bulk: suspects. A Polish barber, a cotton merchant, a royal grandson, a children's author. Each theory rests on the same foundation, the absence of proof, which lets you write anyone's name in the empty space. That is not detective work. That is what a case looks like when there is nothing to detect with. And the killer helped them with nothing. No witnesses ever agreed on a face. Whitechapel's fog and its crowds and its 1,000 dark courts did the rest. He didn't need to be brilliant. He needed to be quick and to keep walking, which is exactly what he did, until the 9th of November, when he stopped being quick and took his time. Mary Jane Kelly is the youngest of the five, around 25, and the only one killed indoors in a rented single room off Dorset Street. That difference matters, and we are going to be careful here, because this is the murder the legend loves most and treats worst. Behind a thin door with the whole night to himself and no fog to hurry him, the killer did what he had never had the privacy to do, before. The police photograph of that room is one of the most reproduced crime scene images in history. We are not going to show it or describe it. If you want to know what was taken from Mary Jane Kelly, the answer is everything, and the record holds the details for anyone who truly needs them. A man collecting rent finds her the next morning, and then nothing. No sixth canonical murder, no arrest, no confession that ever held up. The most intense manhunt of the 19th century simply runs out of victims. Whether he died, was jailed for something else, sailed away, or stopped by choice, no one has ever established. The case files stayed open for decades and were quietly closed with the same sentence they could have written in November 1888. Perpetrator unknown. So let's grade it, one last time. The criminal mastermind who outwitted Scotland Yard. The ledger shows a man who killed the poorest, least protected women in London in the dark, in a district with no forensic science, no shared police records, and two departments that couldn't compare notes across a street. He wasn't unbeatable, he was uncatchable. By that system, in that place, in that year. The taunting genius who signed his work Jack the Ripper, a name most likely invented by a journalist to sell papers, then bolted onto the killer forever. The one real clue? Washed off a wall on the order of the police commissioner himself before a camera could reach it, and the 5 women at the center of it. Remembered by the legend, if at all, as a body count and a profession several of them may not even have had. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Say the names, the papers wouldn't. More than a century later, an entire industry still names new suspects. DNA on a shawl, a scrawl in a diary, a fresh book every few years. Each one briefly certain, each one quietly falling apart. And the reason they keep coming is the same reason the case was never solved in the first place. An empty space where the evidence should be big enough to write any name you like. Jack the Ripper isn't the name of a man who was caught and understood. It's the name of everything Victorian London couldn't see, couldn't share, and in one doorway on Goulston Street, chose to wipe away. The legend wants a monster clever enough to beat the greatest police force on earth. The record gives us something harder to sell and easier to believe. A city that couldn't protect its poor, a police force blind by design, and a newspaper made up to keep the story going. The story is still going. That was always the point. Next time, a woman who advertised for husbands, and a farm that swallowed every man who answered.